So today we're going to talk about practicing with worries and discomfort. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. Also, if you're interested in a deeper dive into the elements of the Dharma of early Buddhism, check out my courses over at onlinedharma.org. You'll notice that I have a couple of bandages on here. I had a recent minor operation having to do with basal cell carcinoma. Some of you may have heard of this. I believe it's the leading form of cancer in the world, form of skin cancer. I think something like 1 out of every 5 people will get it. I don't remember exactly. Maybe it's 1 out of every 3. I don't know, but it's a large number. People going out in the sun and getting this kind of cancer, and although it's minor, it's not that serious. It's something you have to get dealt with. I did have it dealt with, as you like. I discussed this over on Patreon a little while ago. My patrons know about this. I did a video over there. If you want to receive sort of new notifications and these sort of background, behind-the-scenes kinds of videos, discussions of stuff that I'm going through or things that I'm reading, check out my Patreon page. It's linked down below in the show notes. And this is actually my 6th of these operations. I've been through 5 of them before, so this is not anything particularly new for me. They tend to arise on the face. In most people, that's where they've done for me as well. And so it's something that I've actually done a video about this in the past. I did a video a while back on dealing with suffering and dealing with death. And this is a topic that I think probably turns a lot of people off. As a result, that particular video hasn't, let's say, gotten the views of some of my other ones. I'll put a link to it down below because I think it's something, it's a video that also illustrates the lives of other people on YouTube, because there are other YouTubers who have much more serious kinds of illnesses than this, who discuss the process of going through that. And some of these videos, some of these channels are really quite inspirational. And so I also link some of those in that video, talk about some of those in that video. But today what I'm going to be talking about is practicing with these kinds of worries that are brought up. And I think we all go through worries from time to time, whether or not they're particularly medically related. But we all go through them of one kind or another, although having even minor surgery can raise these in a particularly important way and can make us lose sleep, lose time, get stressed. And so what are some of the practices that we can learn from early Buddhism in particular, or from contemporary Buddhism, that can help us through these kinds of situations? And what I'm going to do here is to talk about a couple of them that I used during this period of time, recent period of time, that I found helpful to me. Now, I tend to get easily stressed, and that's one of the things that actually drew me to meditation and Buddhist practice in the first place, was feeling like I could use some strategies and practices that would help me deal with my own tendency towards getting stressed. And perhaps you're the same way, and perhaps you feel the same, that you also tend to get easily stressed in certain kinds of circumstances. And so in any event, one of the practices that I've found useful, Buddhist practices, is what's now called somatic awareness. Now this is a practice that's more of a contemporary practice. I mean, it takes its inspiration from some of the ideas of early Buddhism, but basically a somatic practice is a practice of bodily awareness. That is, it's focused on what we would term mindfulness of the body. Mindfulness of the body is the first of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And the foundations of mindfulness is an idea from early Buddhism of the sutta on mindfulness, this particular discourse that the Buddha gave, which basically breaks up mindfulness practice into 4 different types. And the first of these types is mindfulness of the body, and that's sort of we can understand that these are given in a certain order. So mindfulness of the body is sort of the most preliminary, although it itself is quite deep and really can take us very, very far. But it's great for, I think, lay people. It's great for people who are in very stressful, everyday, daily kinds of situations. It's perhaps not as refined as some of the later steps along this path. But the idea is that our worries, and in particular stresses and worries, but the ones that, let's say, I was going through here in this situation, are future-oriented. They're oriented towards ideas of what the future is going to hold. So, for example, in this circumstance, I was going to a clinic that was new to me. I had never been there before. I guess, as I've said, I've done this before, but never in this clinic. New place. It happened to be quite a bit of a drive, over an hour drive each way. It was, so those were things I was worried about, things that I was concerned about, things that would tend to go on in my mind, what in the Buddhism is called proliferation, mental proliferation. The Pali word is papancha. This idea of these obsessive kinds of thoughts of, this is a new place, what's it going to be like? What is the surgeon going to be like? She seemed very nice, but what is she going to be like when it actually happens? Are they going to really care for me in the way that I had been cared for before? What is the drive going to be like? What is the drive home going to be like? These kinds of worries. Also worries about the operation itself. Was it going to be painful, and to what extent, and what was the recovery period going to be like? These are the kinds of future-oriented concerns that really constitute worry for us. Worry is a sort of a future-oriented state. What one meditation teacher that I had was basically terming ill will towards the future, or a reaction against the future, a feeling of concern about the way the future was going to unfold. And so these body practices, these somatic practices, get us out of the head, get us out of our future-oriented worries and into the body, and in particular, into the present state of the body. So what we're trying to do is to focus on the way we feel right now in our body. So let's say our mind is going obsessively about some particular thought. We're finding that this is not useful to us. So what do? What we do is to drop down into the body. That's generally the way it's put in contemporary parlance. We drop down from the mind, from the head, into the body. And what we ask ourselves is, what do we feel right now? We feel, let's say, tension. We feel like worms crawling inside of our stomach. We feel like all of our muscles are tense and tight. We feel tight around the midsection. We feel tightness in our trunk, let's say. These were kinds of things that I could recognize. We feel perhaps slightly nauseous because of the tension in our stomach. We try to describe the state of our body in as much detail as we can. Basically, is it burning? Is it tense? Does it feel? How does it feel? Does it feel like iron? Does it feel like Jello? Whatever it might be. The point is to try to get ourselves into the present state of our body, and by doing this, we're basically redirecting our thoughts away from the future. So we're no longer thinking about the future, we're thinking about the present. And as we do this, we become curious, or we cultivate a sense of curiosity about our present, the present state of our body, about how it feels, precisely how it feels. And by doing this, what we're doing is cultivating what's really the second stage along these 7 factors of awakening. I did a recent video on the 7 factors of awakening. I'll put a link to that down below as well in case you're interested in seeing that video. But in the 7 factors of awakening, the first of these is mindfulness. And what we're doing, of course, at the beginning here is setting up mindfulness, of attending to the present state of the mind in some broad sense of that. Perhaps quieting ourselves down, perhaps taking a few deep breaths. And then the second stage along these 7 factors of awakening is investigation of states. That's often how it's translated. And so what we're doing is investigating the states of our own body in this particular case. How does it feel? And by doing that, we find in later stages of these 7 factors of awakening that the body, or our state of mind and body just naturally will tend to relax when we do this. We naturally become happier, we become more relaxed, because we're no longer caught up in the obsessive thinking that was related to the future. We are substituting something present. And of course, in our present state, things aren't as dangerous. They aren't as problematic. Usually when we're doing this, we're sitting in a quiet place. That's sort of the point here. We may be lying in bed. We may be sitting in a chair on the floor. We're sitting in somewhere that's without danger, where we are quiet and able to relax and think about the way things are right now, which is not nearly as stressful as what we'd think about the future. So that's one strategy that I found very useful for me when I was undergoing this, I should say before I underwent the surgery, in the days before. This is a sort of thing that I found calm me down, at least for a period of time. And this is even a relatively minor example, but yes, of course, we're going to be in stressful situations. We're going to have to deal with that stress. But if we can find things that even diminish it by a few percent, 10%, 20% in a short period of time, that's a benefit. Now, one other thing that was kind of interesting in this particular example of mine is, as I say, this was a new place, a new clinic, a new surgery, a new surgeon, and she offered something that I had never been given by my previous surgeon, which was she offered the possibility of taking a tranquilizer. Valium was one thing that she prescribed to her patients in case they were interested in that. And this was something that I found conflicted about. I filled the prescription because I thought, why not? She was offering it, so I would fill the prescription. It was only for 3 pills, so it wasn't enough it wasn't expensive or anything, but it was something that I was considering. But at the time, I was also reading some of Tara Brach's book on radical acceptance. I've talked about that also on this on these videos recently. I'll put a link to her book down below also. In that book, she talks about, of course, radically accepting our lives just as they are, as that's a part of basically coming to a feeling of equanimity with the world. And one thing she discusses in that book is undergoing natural childbirth. That is, she was pregnant with, I believe, her first child, and she decided she was not going to take anything that would be a tranquilizer, anything that would get between her and the direct experience of childbirth, even though that would be very painful. Now, I have to admit that I was, and I still am, somewhat conflicted about Tara Brach's strategy here, about her reasoning here. Because I don't think that there's any legitimate Buddhist reason or a legitimate reason within the Dharma for experiencing pain just for the sake of experiencing pain. The Buddha talks about a middle path between indulgence and asceticism, and the path of asceticism is a path that was followed by other religious teachers of his time, the Jains in particular, who believed that, as they say, you reach pleasure through pain, that pain was somehow a method of burning out the bad karma within us, and that so therefore one should undergo pain as a kind of a curative for us. And the Buddha rejected that, and I absolutely agree with the Buddha's rejection here, that there's no reason for us to undergo pain just to experience it. Of course, if we wish to, if that's something that we feel we would like to do, then I don't see a reason not to do it unless it becomes an issue of psychological importance for us. But I'm not saying we have to obviously reject all kinds of pain, but my point is rather a middle path here. That if a doctor recommends or prescribes some kind of pain medication for us, there's no legitimate reason within Buddhism for us to reject that. And so in particular, I noticed a kind of aversion towards the idea of taking Valium. Now, Valium isn't really a pain medication, it's more of a calming medication. And so, where it exactly fits on this spectrum of things that we should take and things that we should avoid is a question that's perhaps somewhat up in the air. But in any event, this was prescribed. I did feel a good deal of aversion towards it, even after having filled the prescription, because for these very reasons, of feeling like, well, do I want to take something that will dull the mind? Do I want to reject that by being a good Buddhist or something like that? And there's also, frankly, the male idea of bravery, of feeling like, well, do I want to be brave, or do I want to feel like I'm chickening out by taking something like this? And that also tends to enter into egoism, of a feeling of puffing up the ego, of feeling like I'm brave as opposed to not being brave, of being able to come on here on a YouTube channel and say, oh, I didn't take this, or to feel like, oh, I'm expressing some form of defeat by having taken it. These are the kinds of papancha, of proliferation that went on in my head before the operation. Now, I do have to say that having been through this before, this kind of operation before a number of times, I felt that I probably was able to sustain the operation without taking Valium. And so I left it up to myself before the operation to see how I felt at the time, at the day, and make a decision right then and there. And I felt right then and there that I was able to go without it, that I didn't think I needed it. And so I still have my pills here. For what it's worth, I didn't take them. I don't think I needed them. But at the same time, I do want to say that I don't think it's a problem if someone does take these kinds of things. If they're prescribed by a medical professional for a particular reason, a particular course of let's say, a stressful kind of surgery or something like that. Because all of us have different pain thresholds or stress thresholds. And I don't think, once again, that there's any legitimate Buddhist reason to forego this kind of prescribed medication for a particular short period of time if we feel we need it. Now, another practice strategy that I found useful to me in the period before the operation and even during the operation, to a limited extent, is the practice of loving kindness. And in early Buddhism, and while the prior example of somatic falling into the body isn't really something that's prescribed in early Buddhism, at least not as any kind of a practice against fear and worry, the somatic kind of idea of really focusing on the feelings in the body is really a contemporary kind of practice. It seems to have risen, I'm not exactly sure of the history, but probably in the late 20th century with impact from Western psychology. But be that as it may, in early Buddhism, it is prescribed, if you like, that we use loving kindness as a practice to combat fear and worry. Stress in the form of fear and worry towards the future. That opening up a loving heart, a kind heart, and really filling ourselves with compassion for others is a great way of diverting the mind away from painful thoughts towards much more wholesome and useful and skillful thoughts. So, for example, let's say being aware of the compassion towards the doctors, the surgeons who are having to do this. Being aware of their compassion towards us, because obviously, even though they're causing us pain, they're doing it for a particular end. These kinds of reflections on our part, or on my part, I think, can help diminish the normal stresses and worries that go along with this kind of circumstance. And I actually did an earlier video just on this practice and the way it was put forward in early Buddhism in some of the early suttas. So what I'd like to do is to put up a link to that early video here on the screen. I suggest you watch it if you want some more advice for strategies and practices to combat worry and stress. I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos, and thanks so much for being here. All of you be well.